They called from the ER just as my phone lit up with my brother's Vegas live stream champagne spraying under strobe lights while fluorescent glare bounced off the ICU floor. I'm Elias Vanor, 54, an internal controller who still winds the pendulum clock my mother treasures. Ever had one night tip your whole family's balance? The ER nurse didn't bother with small talk. Mr. Vanner, your mother's been admitted critical. Before I could answer, my phone lit up Calder's live stream from a Vegas VIP booth. Confetti and champagne foam, his grin tipped sideways like a billboard promise. I watched 3 seconds, the saber arc, the ring of people shouting his name, then locked the screen and followed the nurse through the lemon-bright corridor. Fluorescence hummed. The air carried that antiseptic tang that erases yesterday. Behind a curtain, Mom breathed in thin mechanical pulls. Green flecks in her eyes flickered at me, then vanished under their lids. I said her name the way you speak to a skittish animal. A monitor answered for her. At the admitting desk, a social worker slid forms toward me, tapping the blanks with a capped pen. Do you have an advance directive for her? No, I said. We talked about it once. Didn't finish. She wrote something quick and tidy, then lowered her voice. A male relative called earlier asking about valuables. We don't release information, but, well, you should know. I didn't need to ask which relative. They let me perch at the edge of the curtain until shift change. When a nurse shooed me out, I promised I'd be back. I took Mom's keys, from the plastic tray, and drove to her bungalow off Plum Lane, the sedan's clock joined by the soft click of my thoughts. Desert air drifted through a half-open window. The house smelled faintly of tea and old paper. In the living room, the pendulum clock kept its private counsel left, right, as if time were a steady hand on a skittish shoulder. I set my bag down and went through the mail with a butter knife, coupons, a utility bill, with a red warning bar, a postcard from St. Bridget's about a bake sale. Underneath lay a padded courier envelope forwarded from a P.O. box, Calder's name scrawled across the label. I told myself I was looking for a hospital card. I told myself a lot of things. I slit the envelope and slid out a set of crisp pages, a will amendment, our mother's name in 12-point times boxes already checked in a confident lawyer's hand. Executor Calder Vanner. Compensation reasonable expenses, a phrase that can be stretched like taffy. My stomach tightened. Paper makes people brave. The phone rang again, FaceTime. I caught it mid-buzz. Calder's face filled the screen, glossy hair, the neon of a club wheel spinning somewhere behind him. Eli. You look like you've been sleeping in your car, he shouted over bass. She's in ICU, I said. Did anyone from the hospital call you? She's a tank. Listen, a notary's swinging by the house. Do me a solid and let her in. For what? For grown-up stuff, he said, rolling his eyes. Don't make it weird. And don't poke through my mail. That envelope's mine. The call cut off on an explosion of laughter. I held the pages a moment longer, feeling the stiffness of them, then slid everything back into the envelope and took photos front back, the fine print, because memory and evidence aren't the same thing. I emailed the shots to Warren with a plain subject line, need guidance tonight. The message hung in my outbox, little spinning wheel gnawing at our timeline. In the kitchen, I filled the kettle and never turned on the burner. On the fridge, a magnet held Mom's grocery list in her careful loops: milk, mint, tea, apples, yarn. I added batteries in my cramped block letters and wondered when the last time was that Calder had stood in this spot and written anything useful. I went back to the living room and listened to the clock. The pendulum's rhythm found my breath, steadied it. Some rooms tuck their opinions into corners. This one set them out where you could trip over them. Through the blinds, a strip of streetlight made a white rectangle on the rug. Dust floated in and out of it like uncommitted snow. My phone buzzed again. A photo from Calder Casino cage receipt, his marker number circled in thick ink. Another followed blurrier, our mother's antique jewelry box riding in a trunk, like an unwanted passenger. Liquidity solved, he wrote. We talk will tomorrow. I put the phone face down and let the quiet press in until my ears rang. Somewhere a refrigerator motor clicked off. The house exhaled. The doorbell rang. It wasn't a neighborly tap. It was a single confident note that expected results. I checked the peephole. A woman in a blazer stood on the porch. Leather folio hugged to her ribs, breath fogging in the desert chill. Behind her idled a glossy car, its headlights frosting the curb. I opened the door to the chain. Mobile notary, she said, businesslike. Appointment for Helena Vanner. Your brother scheduled me. My mother is at the hospital, I said. We're not signing anything tonight. It'll just take a minute. That's the problem, I said, and closed the door gently, like setting down a full cup. Footsteps retreated. I watched her taillights melt into the street. The hallway smelled of dust and lemon oil. I photographed the courier envelope on the coffee table, the red bar utility bill, the grocery list. I sent those to Warren too, along with a short line about the notary and the call earlier asking after valuables. I was sliding the deadbolt when the bell rang again, one long press that cut through the clock's patience. Through the peephole this time I saw only a shoulder, the edge of a briefcase, and a face I recognized from parish fundraisers, expensive smile, careful hair, a perfume that arrived half a second before she did. I unlatched the chain and opened the door halfway. We're not signing, I said. She smiled the way people smile at small, stubborn dogs. Good evening, she said, as if we shared a driveway. I'm here on Calder's behalf. I left the chain on the door and let her smile bounce off it. Not tonight, I said, and eased the door shut until the latch clicked. The porch light cut off. The house swallowed the last of her perfume. My phone shivered in my pocket, an automated bank text blinking on the lock screen, new request ad. Joint convenience signer to Helena Vanor, confirm. The glow washed my hand a cold blue. I answered the only way I could at this hour from the driver's seat of my sedan in the hospital garage. Papers spread over the steering wheel, the pendulum of my own pulse ticking in my ears. The fraud hotline picked up on the second ring, a voice too cheerful for midnight. I spelled our last name twice. I read the account number off a utility bill. I said, no, do not authorize, and then softer. Please place a watch for additional attempts. The banker toggled keys, little clacks like rain on aluminum. We can freeze outbound transfers for 72 hours, she said. You'll get a case number in your email. When I hung up, the garage was quiet enough to hear my coffee thermos settling. I opened my camera roll courier draft red bar bill grocery list. I added a fresh screenshot of the bank text and the screen recording of Calder's Vegas story. The saber, the grin, the neon wheel turning like a promise you can never cash. I dropped them into a single PDF, labeled it with the date and Mom's initials, and sent it to Warren. I wrote, need you at first light. Also mobile notary showed said Calder booked her. Virginia Street's all-night diner was 2 lights away. I took a booth by the window, slid my papers into stacks, and let the waitress pour coffee that tasted like it had been brave too long. Chrome gleamed. The pie carousel revolved with the sleepy stubbornness of people who refuse to go home. My phone vibrated again, case number from the bank. Intake ticket from the law office. I wrote down both on a napkin and tucked it under the mug as if weight could keep luck from blowing away. Back at Renown, the elevator hummed like an old hymn. On the ward, the floor nurse was checking meds, counting with her lips. Someone's been into her oxy, she said, not accusing so much as tired. We'll lock it. She glanced at me. You family. You look like you've already fought 3 fights tonight. I asked to put a note on the chart. No information to anyone not listed. No signatures without the attending present, no exceptions. She nodded, pen moving. We see it more than you'd think, she said. Grief comes in 10 flavors. So does greed. The security guard at the desk squinted, trying to place me. Your brother the one with the silver coupe, he asked. Guy like that tried to wheel a TV past me a month ago, said it was equipment he donated. He shrugged. People forget hospitals have cameras. I thanked him and went to sit by the curtain, while the machines did their patient arithmetic. Mom's fingers twitched against the sheet. I took her hand and felt that small electric insistence the way a bird tests air. Her eyes opened a slit sea green in the monitor light. Don't let your brother rush me, she whispered, each word its own hill. I told her the nurses were guarding the door, and so was I. She closed her eyes as if satisfied with that lineup. I stepped back into the hall to give the night its due. From the window, Reno's lights looked like scattered coins. I thought of Calder's marker number circled in heavy ink of the jewelry box in the trunk of the word reasonable stretching until it snapped. My phone buzzed in my hand. A direct message slid onto the screen, a crisp photo of a casino cage receipt, the dollar figure fat and smug. Then another blurrier, the antique box riding dark in a trunk. Liquidity solved, Calder wrote. We'll chat tomorrow. The typing bubble appeared, disappeared, then came back like a dare. I stared at the 2 images until my thumb left a smear on the glass, and the coffee on my breath went cold. By the time the sun found the blinds at Laskin & Fellows, dust hung in the slats like slow confetti. Warren waved me into a leather chair and pushed a legal pad across the table. His tie was a little crooked. His eyes were kind. Elias, he said, leaning back. If we do this, it's by the book. No shortcuts. Shortcuts don't hold. The office hummed with small machines, the fax like a sleepy insect, the copier clearing its throat. Reese, the paralegal, brought coffee in paper cups and an accordion folder with my mother's name embossed on a tab. Her handwriting was a narrow stream that didn't spill. We'll start with medical POA, she said, laying out a stack. Guardianship perimeter if capacity dips. Advance directive to guide care. And if she regains capacity, we'll do any estate changes under a neutral physician's assessment. Hospital boards hate bedside legal scuffles, Warren added, uncapping a pen. They don't want family drama in the ICU. Marcella Thorne prides herself on gliding through policy cracks. She's gilded influence. He said it gently, the way you talk about weather you can't vote against. We worked the way carpenters do, measure, mark, cut, check the line again. Warren dictated the exact sequence for any will update, attending physician's note of lucidity, a separate consult from a neutral doctor, a notary unaffiliated with either side, and witnesses without a financial stake. Reese logged each requirement as if she were pinning butterflies. The fax spit out hospital forms one by one, banded with that pale gray the machine gives official paper, as though it's been up all night too. When the signatures we could sign were signed, Warren slid me a yellow legal pad. Inventory, he said. Not just for value, for story. Thieves don't understand stories. We drove to Mom's house in separate cars. The morning was clean, sky cold, the kind that makes you think anything can be started over. Inside, I narrated while Reese took photos, the quilt Mom's hands never quite finished, the china with hairline veins like frost. We opened drawers and wrote down what lived there, silver spoons in tissue, a shoebox of letters, a jar of buttons that clicked like rain when shifted. At the mantel, I stopped. The pendulum clock ticked in modest satisfaction, brass face winking. Reese's flash popped. Light slid over the bezel and returned a soft gold to the ceiling. Still intact, I said. It sounded like a diagnosis and a prayer. We took the file box from the hall closet to the dining table. Warren put on reading glasses and began lifting documents like thin stones from a stream. Utilities property tax. Church pledge, he murmured, stacking. Insurance. He paused. Life. He lifted a recent form, newer paper, whiter, the kind of white that hasn't learned patience. He read silently, then again slower. Change request 3 weeks ago, he said. Primary beneficiary Calder Vanner. My mouth tasted like old pennies. Mom didn't mention it. People don't, when persuaded to simplify, Warren said. He tapped the lower third of the page. Here. The clause was tidy as a mousetrap, accelerated benefit available upon qualifying event. See rider. He sat back. Accelerated benefits can be legitimate. They can also invite timing games. Dangerous. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The word settled in the room and took up a chair. I thought of Calder's casino receipt, the jewelry box crouched in the dark, the way Reasonable had ballooned into a weather system. Reese photographed the page front and back. I added a note to the inventory. Life insurance change request date rider. Warren gathered the stack and rebanded it neat as stitches. We're going to ask the carrier for a confirmation call to Helena, he said. With me on speaker. If she's not lucid, we stop it. If she is, we ask when and why the change was made. We drove to St. Bridget's for the second half of the morning. Warren believed in letting a story breathe among the people it belonged to. The parish hall smelled of coffee and Lysol. Folding tables leaned against the wall like tired men. Father Nolan was sorting hymnals into stacks, his sleeves rolled. He looked up and smiled through his beard. Elias, he said, the syllables soft as bread. Helena would be bossing us all if she could get out of that bed. She will, I said, and heard the faith in my voice before I felt it. He shook Warren's hand and asked after my mother in the way priests do, which is to ask after your courage. He remembered her chair at bake sales, her way of labeling things so even strangers knew where Flower lived. We keep her spot open, he said, touching the corner of a table, just in case she walks in and says we've put the spoons in the wrong drawer. It loosened something in me to laugh. Back at the office, Warren spread the day's work across the conference table the way a cook lays out ingredients before heat is involved. We have the perimeter, he said. We have the path. What we don't have is time. Marcella moves quickly when curtains are drawn. Reese slid a neat list toward me, case numbers, contact names, next steps. I signed what was mine to sign. We were packing up when my phone began to dance across the wood, buzzing a little hop. Renown flashed on the screen. I answered, already moving. A voice I didn't know, crisp as a pressed blouse, Mr. Vanner. This is the unit clerk at Renown. A representative is here insisting she's authorized to speak on your mother's behalf regarding estate matters. My throat dried. What representative? A brief pause, and in it I could hear the clerk turning her head, lowering her voice the way people do when they're looking at a person who dresses her certainty in pearls. She gave her name as Marcella Thorne, the clerk said. She says you'll be expecting her. Marcella was already inside the curtain when I stepped into the bay, her perfume arriving half a second before her voice. Just a quick signature while she's comfortable, she told the charge nurse, smile polished to a courtroom shine. A capped pen hovered over a clipboard angled toward my mother's chest, as if the plastic might lean down and collect the name itself. Stop, I said, because there are words that are tools and words that are alarms. The nurse's eyes found mine. She straightened one finger on the monitor silence button. Marcella didn't flinch. "Elias," she said, light as lint. "We were just tidying loose ends. No drama." On the chair beside her clutch lay a small blue device shaped like a fountain pen, vent holes along the barrel, a tiny jack at the end. The cap wasn't all the way on. A blank notary acknowledgement peeked from beneath the consent page, edges sharp as intentions. The morphine pump clicked its metronome. The curtain breathed with the HVAC. I kept my voice even. "Hospital policy requires the attending physician to certify lucidity for any estate documents and a neutral witness unaffiliated with either side." I held up my phone. "Our counsel is on speed dial. We can put him on speaker now." Marcella's eyes flicked to the nurse and back. She recapped the pen with an audible snap. "No one is coercing anyone," she said, the tone that always sounds like an apology and a dare. "Then no one will object to waiting." The nurse said, voice firmer now. "We're here for health decisions. Legal matters go through hospital counsel." I thumbed Warren's number. He answered on the second ring, the steady gravel of a man who has seen people try to lift silverware off tables bolted to the floor. "Put me on speaker," he said. I did. We said our names. The nurse brought over the ward phone. Hospital counsel joined, crisp and unhurried. Warren laid out the protocol as if he were reading a recipe, step by measured step, and at the end, Marcella's smile thinned by 1 millimeter. "I'll return when Helena is more comfortable," she said at last, the sort of sentence that exits on high heels. She slid the blank acknowledgement back into her folio, tucked the blue pen, and smoothed the curtain with 2 fingers, small goodbye to a stage that had not clapped. When she'd gone, the nurse exhaled. "We can post a sign on the chart," she said. "No visitors for legal matters, without hospital counsel present." She wrote it out in sure block letters and taped it above the rails where sunlight would hit the ink and make it look permanent. Mom's lashes trembled once like a bird thinking about air. I told her I'd be back for the evening check and left before the morphine's soft syllables could trick my resolve. The house looked the same until it didn't. The living room had that half-lived-in, quiet chair pillows, leaning slightly toward one another, a book face down on an arm, as if it had been caught eavesdropping. On the mantel, the clock lay on its side. The glass face was veined by a diagonal crack, a fine white scar. For a weird second, I thought it was a trick of light. Then I saw glitter on the runner crumbs of glass, polite and incriminating. A window latch showed a fresh scratch crescent bright against old paint. I followed the small rude story into the bedroom and stood at the dresser where the jewelry box normally sat. The square of unfaded wood where it should have been was as loud as any alarm. A single thread of velvet had snagged on the drawer, pull the way a voice sometimes snags on a name. I warmed soup that tasted of onions, and the kind of patience you only learn cooking for one. Toast browned and clicked. Butter made a small weather of the kitchen. I set the clock on the table and without thinking wiped the fractured pane with a dish towel. Steam from the bowl fogged the glass along the crack first, then along the whole circle so that for a brief breath I couldn't see the hands at all. It felt like time holding its sleeve to its mouth to cough. I called Warren and reported the scene in clean pieces, the pen device, the notary form, the window, the missing box. He took notes I couldn't see. "We'll log it all," he said. "And we'll ask hospital counsel to formalize the visitor rule. Don't throw anything away." The doorbell rang before we could exchange anything comforting. Not a neighbor's ring. A courier's efficient practiced. I signed for the stiff envelope and opened it at the counter. Another draft. This one bolder as if it had grown muscles in the night, sole executor, broader indemnity. a paragraph that sounded like someone patting his own back for being generous with other people's money. On top, a yellow sticky note in tidy block caps: "Time is money. Don't be the problem." I set the note beside the cracked clock and watched the two face each other in the lamplight. Someone else's timeline and something ours had measured for years. The kitchen threw a long strip of yellow across the floor toward the hallway, stopping just short of the door, like a warning that was also a path. My phone buzzed and jittered against the wood. Warren again, his voice quicker than it had been all day. "Elias," he said, "a file just hit my secure tip line. Audio. It sounds like Calder. He's talking about pressure tactics and timing. I need you to hear this now." The blinds in Warren's conference room were drawn halfway, slicing the morning into neat gray bands. Calder arrived late, tan lines peeking from his cuffs, grin set to default victory. He dropped into a chair without asking, legs wide, as if furniture were flattered to hold him. Marcella glided after Pearl Broach, catching a line of light and throwing it across the heavy oak like a small, well-bred lighthouse. "Let's keep this civilized," Calder said, tapping a glossy folder. "Mom wants simplicity. I've brought a revised will and a care directive. Cleaner for everyone." Warren's smile was the cordial kind that never reached the eyes. "Of course," he said, and leaned toward me just enough that only the table heard. "If he talks insurance, we've got him." I set a manila folder on the wood. The edges had softened under my fingers during a week of holding on. Inside, courier drafts with their smug checkboxes as screenshots of bank alerts, a copy of the life insurance change request, with the date that didn't fit any story but Calder's. Steam rose from the coffee carafe, one thin ghost, and then thinned to nothing. Calder opened his folder and fanned papers like a dealer breaking a deck. "We're all adults. I take the logistical strain you—" He flicked two fingers at me. "Stop overcomplicating. Logistics," Warren said softly, "are worth doing right." He kept his hands flat. "You've proposed yourself as sole executor. You've also prepared a care directive that oddly contradicts the one Helena signed last year." Marcella tilted her head, the movement of someone smelling weakness. "Families evolve," she said. "Documents evolve slower," Warren said. I slid our evidence across. The sound the folder made on wood papery definite felt better than any speech I'd rehearsed. Warren skimmed, pausing at the insurance form. "Accelerated benefit rider," he murmured. "Curious." Calder's grin twitched. "Common product," he said too fast. "If Mom needs liquidity for care, we can trigger a portion early. It's responsible. I've read the rider. Have you?" Warren said, and his voice turned the temperature down 1/2 degree. He nodded at Reese. She lifted a small recorder, matte black, nothing dramatic, and pressed play. The room filled with Calder's own voice, unbothered, unmistakable. "You time it right. You don't even have to fight probate. The accelerated clause does the heavy lifting. She's half there anyway. We push a clean signature gently, and the policy pays us to be good sons." A laugh followed, and Marcella's lower register: "Pressure, not force. Words matter." Chairs creaked, the ghosts of that earlier room. Calder laughed now, too loud. "Out of context," he said. "Locker room banter." "Locker rooms do not administer estates," Warren said. He clicked the recorder off and set it by his legal pad like a fourth-place setting. "For the record, this audio arrived on our tip line. Authentication will follow." Calder leaned forward, fingers splayed, the performative calm of a man who thinks the floor belongs to him. "Mom wants me to handle things," he said. "You're sentimental. I'm efficient." "Efficient," I said, "like opening joint accounts at midnight and sending notaries to ICU bays. Efficient, like misplacing a jewelry box." Marcella's smile thinned. Let's not descend. On the contrary, Warren said, still pleasant. We ascend to procedure. He slid a printed checklist toward them, boxes as crisp as ice. Any estate change requires an attending certification of lucidity, a neutral physician's second opinion, an unaffiliated notary, and 2 disinterested witnesses. No discussions at the bedside. No pressure of any flavor. Calder's gaze cut to Reese. Turn that thing off, he snapped, reaching for the recorder with a suddenness that surprised even him. Warren's hand met his with a flat, decisive sound, palm to wood. For a heartbeat, the room held its breath. Calder's fingers hovered above Warren's, then retreated, a retreat that cost him to perform slowly. Sit, Warren said, and the word had more gravity than the chair that obeyed. I watched the steam on the carafe fade completely, leaving only the shape of heat. There was a tremor in my wrist I hadn't noticed until it wasn't there anymore. Here's how we proceed, Warren said, arranging the air into order. We will advise the hospital board of attempted end-run tactics around patient capacity. We will notify the carrier regarding irregularities in the beneficiary change and the use of the accelerated rider as leverage. We will request their compliance team's review. Calder tried on another grin and found it didn't fit. You think the hospital cares? He asked. They hate paperwork. They hate liability, Warren said. And district attorneys hate schemes that monetize a parent's confusion. He gathered the recorder, the checklist, and my manila folder into a neat stack that looked like the beginning of a case rather than the end of a conversation. This meeting is over. Marcella rose with the grace of someone leaving a gala before the speech's end. We'll respond in writing, she said, which is what people say when they plan to shop for a different weather report. Calder lingered, knuckles whitening on the chair back, as if the oak had insulted him. You can't keep me out, he said finally, low enough that it wanted to be a threat, and failed. No, I said. Mom can. He let go. The blinds rattled when the door shut behind them. Dust swirled in the pale bands like a flock reorganizing mid-air. Warren exhaled a sound that carried months. He stacked the evidence as if weighing it. We'll be taking this to the hospital board, he said almost to himself, and maybe the DA. He looked at me, the kindness back. Drink the coffee, Elias. It won't be warm much longer. She's awake, the ICU nurse said, catching me in the hallway, and she asked for both sons. Her hand touched my sleeve, a quiet tether. She's clearer than she's been in days, she added, voice dropping. Don't waste it. The room had been rinsed with morning. Sunlight pushed through the blinds in measured strips and laid itself across the blanket. The monitors kept their steady metronome, a choir of patient beeps. Mom's eyes were open and almost mischievous, the way they used to look when she smuggled extra frosting onto a cake. Calder was already inside, drumming 2 fingers on the bed rail until the nurse raised an eyebrow. He switched to tapping his foot, heel thump on tile, like he was marking time he'd rather sell. Warren stood at the foot of the bed with a leather folder, hospital counsel beside him, tablet ready. The air felt ceremonial and fragile, like the start of a hymn. Hi, Ma, I said and took her hand. It was warmer than yesterday. Boys, she said, voice papery but decided. Enough of the nonsense. Calder smiled like it might help. We agree, Mom. Let's keep it simple. She turned her head toward the blinds, as if aligning something inside with the measured light. Simple, she said. Yes. Simple is fair. She looked back at me. Elias will manage. Calder laughed in the way you do when you hope a different soundtrack will appear if you make enough noise. Mom, you told me I told you, she said, and the softness left the syllables to stop rushing me. The nurse glanced up. The monitor went on marking what mattered. I want my house, what's in it, and what's left in the accounts divided fairly. Church gets its share. The fund we talked about gets set up. Her eyes found Warren. Write it the way we planned on the phone before I got foggy. Warren's pen waited respectful. We'll phrase it clearly, Helena. But first we need to record your wishes on the capacity form. I'm going to ask a few questions. Then, if hospital counsel is satisfied, we'll sign the updated directive and will. The questions were small anchors tossed into larger seas name-date place. The last holiday we spent together. The color of the front door on Plum Lane. She answered without reaching. When Warren asked what a beneficiary was, she didn't blink. The person you intend to receive, not the one who takes, she said, and something unclenched in my chest. Hospital counsel nodded and keyed notes. Capacity confirmed for this limited purpose, she said. Proceed. Warren set the forms on a firm clipboard and read aloud the clauses we'd built. No changes at bedside without 2 disinterested witnesses. No accelerated insurance benefits used as leverage for care. Division instructions. Executor designation. Me subject to trustee oversight for the fund. The nurse and another staffer stood at the ready, as witnesses, their badges catching sunlight and throwing tiny squares of brightness onto the floor. Calder's foot kept time faster now. Mom, this is over-lawyered. We can do this next week when you're home. Next week is not promised, she said. Today is here. She reached for the pen. I could feel its warmth from the sun on the tray. The barrel held a little heat like a saved breath. Her hand shook, steadied. Don't hover, she told Calder not unkindly. You vibrate. She signed the medical directive first, then each page of the will update slow and precise, as if writing a recipe she meant to hand down. The notary brought by the hospital badge clipped to her collar, stamped, and dated each seal, an audible thunk like a door closing softly in the right house. Calder's smile broke at the edges. This is invalid, he said, too bright. She's medicated. She doesn't grasp what she's doing. Don't make me smaller to make yourself taller, Mom said. She squeezed my fingers. Protect what matters. Warren gathered the signed pages and placed them flat in his folder. For the record, he said, addressing counsel, we followed hospital protocol, attending's note capacity. Check, neutral, notary, disinterested witnesses, no bedside discussion prior to verification. The door opened on a gust of perfume and intent. Marcella stepped in with a security officer, pearls steady as if they'd never learned to wobble. This signing is improper, she announced. No one informed us of the timing. We'll contest. Warren's smile arrived like good weather after a long forecast. Every statute followed, he said, friendly as a doorman. You're welcome to file whatever you like. We'll file this. He tapped the folder. The monitors continued their even testimony. Sunlight warmed the pen where it rested, and Mom's breath fell into rhythm with the machine, unafraid for the first time in weeks. 2 weeks later, Calder left Reno the way he'd arrived, loud in the beginning, then suddenly quiet. No message, no apology, just a forwarding address written on the back of a cocktail napkin and stuck in my mailbox as if we were still kids trading dares. Marcella stopped returning calls. The house felt larger for their absence, not emptier, like someone had opened a window and the air finally moved. Let's make the house lively again, my mother said that morning. Her voice had climbed out of its thinness. It carried a little mischief now, like she was already rearranging chairs in her mind. She wore her cardigan with the pearl buttons that never quite lined up, and her hair, thinner than before, caught the window light in soft threads. I brewed tea that actually steeped long enough to taste like something, and we sat at the kitchen table writing lists, as if lists were a way to bless the future. First on mine, the clock. The repair shop was on a side street downtown, the kind of place where time keeps its manners. Bells jingled when I pushed the door. The smell was varnish and old wood, a smell that makes you stand up a little straighter. Joelle wiped her hands on a rag and came out from behind a bench loaded with springs and small brass moons. She was the sort of person you trust with screws that look like seeds. "Vanner," she said, reading the tag on my claim slip. "The pendulum with the cracked glass." "That's the one." She brought it out, wrapped in brown paper, then eased the front open. New glass caught the light and held it. The brass was buffed to the shade of memory after rain. She showed me the fracture line under the bezel where the frame had been soldered and smoothed until you had to squint to see the truth. "It will always have had a break," she said, "but it won't live broken." I liked that sentence enough to pay for it twice. Back at the house, I set the clock on the mantel and stepped aside. The room received it the way a room receives a person who has been both guilty and forgiven. Mom reached out slowly, because everything is slower now, and ran her palm over the new glass. Her eyes shone with the kind of wet that doesn't fall. "Feels like time's whole again," she whispered. The first swing of the pendulum sounded like a stitching needle pulling thread through cloth. Tick, tock, breath, then another. We spent the afternoon with folders. Warren arrived in shirt sleeves, the summer heat turning his tie into decoration more than duty. He spread documents over the dining table, as if we were frosting a cake trust agreement on top schedules beneath the founding resolution for the Helena Vanner Fund near the Good Pen. Ink pooled and set on the signatures with a shine I could almost hear. He explained the trustee oversight with the patience of a man who's fixed more roofs than he's built. He handed Mom the pen, then me, and his face didn't move until each page was initialed where it ought to be. "Scholarship guidelines," he asked, tapping another stack. "We keep it simple," Mom said, dead serious. "First-generation students, healthcare or trades. 2 recipients to start. 1 named in honor of the parish nurse who stayed after her shift to braid my hair." Warren smiled with the corners of his eyes. "Noted," he said, and actually noted it. We drove to St. Bridget's just before evening mass to speak with Father Nolan. The parish hall smelled like coffee and floor wax. Folding chairs shuffled in their sleep along the wall. He shook Mom's hand with both of his, then mine, and listened the way some people only pretend to, chin tucked down, a little eyes trained on your mouth, so you feel your words choosing better posture. He remembered the winter bake sale where Mom labeled every cookie by hand because the labels mattered more than anyone believed. "We'll set a table by the door," he said, drawing a rough layout on a scrap of bulletin with a borrowed pencil. "We'll ring the bell at noon if the bell agrees. Your clock can chime with it if it likes attention." Back at the house again, I stood the clock so it faced the front door. The faint scent of varnish lifted each time I walked by, and the living room's quiet changed from wary to waiting. I printed the trust's first page and set it beside the photo of Mom at the fair 2 decades ago, cotton candy making a pink cloud over the shoulder she'd lean on when her feet got tired. The pendulum's swing turned the glass into a soft mirror. In it, I saw us smaller, yes, and a bit worn, but in the frame together. Mom was tiring. Her skin had that translucent look it gets after too much day. I helped her to the sofa and tucked a blanket around her knees. She tugged my hand before I could let go the tug of a woman who has lived long enough to know which moments deserve an anchor. "Promise me," she said, sudden and fierce as a vow. "Whatever happens next, you'll follow through with the parish project. Don't let grief make you lazy." "I won't," I said. I meant it more than most sentences I've signed. She nodded once and leaned back, the clock's tick knitting itself to her breathing. Outside, the heat tempered to a softer gold. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower coughed and gave up. Warren gathered his briefcase and left with the kind of quiet goodbye that understands the holiness of ordinary rooms. I checked the front door, switched off the kitchen light, and stood with my hand on the mantel. The new glass held a thin reflection of the lampshade like a crescent moon. The hands marked 7:30 and made it look intentional. My phone buzzed Father Nolan already sending a draft of the announcement, the words "First Awards this fall" bright against the screen. Mom squeezed my fingers again, lighter this time, like a seal pressed into cooling wax. "Lively," she murmured, eyes closed but smiling. "Let's make it lively again." "I hear you," I said, and let the room say it back in ticks. The parish hall smelled of lilies and floor wax, a Sunday scent even on a Saturday. A white banner arced above the stage, Helena Vanner Education and Care Fund, the letters hand-painted by teenagers who still took pride in keeping inside the lines. Volunteers ferried casseroles to long tables, lids clacking, steam trading recipes with the lilies. Near the entrance, our old pendulum clock sat on a waist-high plinth, gleaming and discreetly pleased with itself. A woman from the welcome table leaned toward me. "Your brother tried to RSVP last night," she murmured. "We suggested he send congratulations by mail." Her smile was kind, not cruel. I thanked her, surprised to find relief where I'd been bracing for annoyance. Mom arrived in her wheelchair cardigan pinned at the shoulder with the parish nurse's old brooch. Radiant isn't a word I've used much in my life, but it was the right one. Her face lit, not from the fluorescence, but from some interior room with the lights all on. Warren waved from the aisle. Father Nolan came forward with that steady warmth that makes you believe in institutions again. The hall filled in quiet ripples, neighbors, choir folks, school kids in pressed shirts, the clock ticking a secret metronome none of them knew they were hearing. I kept the speech short because good rooms deserve air. I talked about labels on bake sale tins and the way they told you where to stand even when you didn't know you were lost. I told them about a kitchen list written in tidy loops that treated milk and mercy with the same seriousness, and about a clock that had cracked and been soldered back so cleanly you only saw the seam if you squinted on purpose. When I said we were starting small, 2 scholarships this year, first-generation students, healthcare and trades. The applause came like rain on a tin roof, honest local. We called the names. A girl with ink-stained fingers and a backpack still on one shoulder. A boy whose handshake carried the careful pressure of someone taught to respect torque. Their envelopes were heavier than the paper suggested. Edges clicked against their thumbs. Their families cried and pretended they weren't. Mom reached for each hand in turn and said, "Write when you need more recipes," which made no sense and perfect sense at once. At noon, Father Nolan raised his hand. Silence wove itself through the room. He nodded at me. I adjusted the clock's small brass key the way Joelle had shown me. Somewhere high above us, the church bell began to toll round forgiving notes. Our clock answered smaller, sure, but tuned just close enough to braid with the larger sound. The chimes layered and drifted under the rafters until the applause rose up to meet them, and everything settled into one pulse. Warren squeezed my shoulder. "Your mother has always understood budgets," he said. "Turns out she understands time, too." I leaned close to Mom. "We made it," I said. She turned her head, breath a soft rustle. "You kept the right time," she whispered, a smile finding the corners of her mouth. That's all any of us can do after cake and handshakes and photos where no one knew what to do with their hands. The hall thinned to folding chairs and people who move at the speed of real life. I wheeled Mom to the clock. The varnish still gave off the faintest sweet note when you stood close. In the glass, we were a small reflection, 2 figures in a frame that had learned how to hold. I opened the case and nudged the pendulum a fraction. steadying its arc, not correcting it so much as acknowledging the room. The brass winked. The tick answered. Outside, the bell gave one last warm note, like a benediction that wasn't in a hurry to end. That afternoon, as the hall emptied and the last slice of pie cooled on its plate, I caught the clock's chime drifting through the open door, clear, steady, and whole again. It struck me how mending glass isn't so different from mending trust. Both require patience, the right tools, and the will to see past the cracks. Justice had been done, but more than that, hope had been set back on its feet. Sometimes we're given the gift of repairing not just what we keep, but what we pass on. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? I'd love to hear your story in the comments.